You guys have a beta release for Palia.
No one's made a community sim MMO. That's first.
I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm sold.
It's a Westerner being inspired by Easterners, being inspired by Western settings.
How does all of this live in your head?
A lot of our style guide about like inflating and deflating shape is inspired by the silhouette of a sake bottle.
What does make your project so special for your team?
We are really trying to do something different.
Hi everyone, my name is Ninelli Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Devoted Speakeasy. Today I have an amazing guest with me, Jeremy Fenske. Jeremy, hi.
Hello, hey. Thanks for inviting me.
First, before we dive in, please, everybody who watches it, like, subscribe, share, anything you can do to support us growing the community and helping other artists and professionals in the gaming industry to share the word. And I would really appreciate that. Jeremy, it's exciting time. You guys are about to have a beta release for Palia, the project that I'm immensely excited about because it speaks to female audience mostly, I would say. I'm just speaking for myself. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Palia is developed by a studio called Singularity 6. The studio was founded by two ex-Riot developers, Aiden Karbach and Anthony Leong. I was lucky enough to get reached out by them, over 5 years ago now. So this would be 2018. I was really just excited by the pitch. You know, I'd worked on games like Elder Scrolls Online and MMO, and I worked on Destiny 2 and some of the expansions. So I've come from the space of both MMOs and also like kind of more realistic, a little bit more like shooter genre. And I was really excited to work on something very different. At the time, like I was playing Stardew Valley. I love Animal Crossing. I love Harvest Moon. I love Breath of the Wild. I was becoming a huge fan of them at that time. So when I heard their dream was to make a community sim MMO, I was like, oh shit, that's awesome.
Dude, this is awesome, man.
I went and worked with them directly one weekend. I lived in San Diego at the time. I just drove up and into the place in LA, and I was pretty impressed with how organized they were, like how thoughtful they were about monetization, how thoughtful they were about the growth of the studio, how to scale. And I just felt really confident about them. And I was like, sign me on. Let's do it.
So how long were you in a concept art role versus switching to an art director?
I kind of came on as like the art guy generally, as like the concept artist to just start like generating the style and everything. And sort of naturally, I kind of started developing like the style guide. I was, reaching out to artists to join the team. I was building a pipeline. I was setting the pillars and the goals for the art. So it was just kind of a natural fit that I resumed the role of art director officially. So yeah, it wasn't long. I think it was, not even a year. I was pretty aware that that's going to be a result that I may have to, find impact in other ways that aren't just painting and drawing the solution. It's a thing of like, do I spend my time like spending all day on a painting that says a thing, or do I spend my time hiring a team of artists to make, hundreds of paintings, right?
You were working on Elder Scrolls and Destiny, right? And which is a completely different art styles. Tell me, like, how does that transition happen?
For me, art fundamentals are pretty universal. It doesn't matter if you're doing sci-fi, medieval fantasy, modern day, like the design fundamentals are the same, right? Certainly working on Elder Scrolls Online, I was there for 6 years, from like when we were a team of 20 something to when we were like 400 developers. So after the course of that many years, as much as I loved the team there and enjoyed the project, I just got bored. It's just, I wanted to work on something different. So in the background, I was really interested in like John Berkey, John Harris, like classic fantasy illustrator or like sci-fi fantasy illustrators. And I started making work kind of modeled after that inspiration. And I got really into like, that kind of clean sci-fi look, which happened to work pretty well with, what, Destiny was. So I was able to support them through the Activision studio High Moon. And I was very happy to do that. And it was like exactly what I was interested in at the time. Well, while working on Destiny, I was also feeling like I needed a catharsis. So my personal work was more whimsical, lighter, more colorful, more painterly. I just enjoyed painting, and I kind of got a little tired of just like 3D model, kit bash, paint over, texture, photo texture on top, right? Like that's cool and everything, and I still enjoy doing that, but I want to paint. I want color in life, and it was just again, it was like a catharsis, and that body of work kind of got the interest of the two founders there, and that's what spawned things here.
So they just found you on ArtStation?
Yeah, I don't know where. I think if I had to guess, they probably saw. I did a fan piece of Zelda Breath of the Wild years ago that kind of went all over the place. I still get messaged about it all the time. They probably saw that and thought it was like a nice fit visually for their pitch deck.
I want to actually dive deeper in the artwork and see the earlier pieces if we can do that. Was this the first piece that you made, or like one of the first ones?
This was probably the very first image that we ever released from the studio. We used it as our banner for our studio website for a little bit. I guess like for me very early on, I was trying to think about what is the marquee like feeling and tone for this game, because yes, it is a community simulator. Yes, it's about farming and cooking, but we also have this huge world story, this mystery and intrigue of like the state of the world and why humans are returning back to this planet after thousands of years of being gone.
Okay, so it has a bunch of whimsical animals. Are they real?
Let me preface this by when I started working there, what I would do to kind of develop like the world and the art styles, I would do a sketch a day or thereabouts, where I would just sketch ideas that just came to me from inspirations that we have, and then from these sketches, this body of work, I can start picking pieces and parts of it and saying, okay, this is working. This creature inspired one of our few creatures that are in the shipping game. It's called an Ormu. So, it's like little inspirations come from this body of work, right? It's like, it's about nature, it's peaceful, there's ancient culture there. And again, just like trying to figure out what is the tone of like the village. Of course, this is a community sim game, so we need that village center, we need the villagers, we need like that village vibe, right? This one's just about like the hiddenness of the ancient civilization. It's buried deep within the world. It's kind of hidden in plain sight. So just trying to like, I don't know, think of ways that we could pay off moments, in the world where magic is suddenly reappearing back in the world. I'm a big fan of this artist, fine artist called Andy Goldsworthy, who does these like natural based, like, organizing leaves in a way that makes it feel like supernatural in some way. So I thought it'd be fun to like maybe play with that in our visual design. Again, it's like going back to nature, that feeling.
Looking at this, I'm like, I can't wait to play.
Again, this is not representative of the game. It's more vibe.
I mean, your goal was to create the mood, right? An experience that you want to participate in. I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm sold.
Well, I'm sold then. And I'm going to throw you a fundraiser.
This kind of goes to the point of what I was saying, is it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just about the idea. That's what's always worked for me in production, is that sometimes it's not about like the most beautiful image, because you could spend several hours on an image and then have it just slightly not quite be right or accurate to what's needed. Sometimes a sketch like this is just enough. It's not pretty, but it's fine. It works. The kind of theme for a lot of the work is about like just blue sky, very optimistic, rolling green hills, this kind of agricultural kind of aspect to it, plus the adventure, plus the fantastic fantasy intrigue. Like that sort of combination of things is always really interesting to me. Fits with like a lot of my inspiration is like Studio Ghibli kind of background painting, because I think Ghibli movies are best when they kind of take a familiar world, they take a character that you're kind of seeing through, like they're like the audience eyes, and they peel back the curtain to some like hidden in plain sight fantasy world. So I really like that.
Totoro? Is that what your name is? Totoro?
Again, this is not, I'm not previewing something that's going to be in the game, but who knows? Like there's little inspirations here and there that we pull from. But just, I think that's like kind of the major formula, right? It's like familiar, but then there's like this edge of unfamiliarity. Like I was always really inspired by like classic Japanese RPG games that I grew up playing. Like my friends and I would just like bootleg, burn PS1 discs of like, Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, all these games. And one thing that was always really interesting to me is a lot of those game settings, they're like, it's castles and knights and kind of the tropes that we're used to as Westerners, but done with like, it's everything feels fresh and unique in a weird way. And it's a lot of like these Eastern developers telling stories in Western settings. And then I wanted to make a game that was like, it's a Westerner being inspired by Easterners being inspired by Western settings. This image here was a big one. It is that image where we put everything together, like, after several loops of exploring the architecture, like the shape of the clouds, the mountains, like just putting it together in like a postcard.
I would assume like creating pieces like that is not only for the art team, but also for the development team and for the design team. Is that a collaborative process for you guys as well?
Absolutely. And for our narrative team, a lot of these pieces were inspirational, for the game director too. Like I would make these images and we would print them out. I brought my printer from home to the office and I would just like be printing them out and putting them on the walls. This was before COVID, before we're all work from home. We could just like look at it and talk about it. Like if any ideas, like even gameplay features, come from these sketches.
I have a weird question. How does all of this live in your head? Like, how do those images, how do they get there? And then they also get there.
Yeah, I don't know. Like where does inspiration come from? I think maybe in some ways we're all artificially using like an image algorithm, because that's what we do at Concept, right? You gather your references and inspiration and then you like mesh it together and create like a new product.
Is it different like when you first have it in your head, you seeing it from the beginning to end and then you're kind of putting it there, or it kind of develops while you're drawing it?
I think if I do that, I'm going to be very frustrated very quickly. Like if I like try to intuit what I'm imagining exactly, like I think there's going to be a translation issue. I kind of see it more as like it's like surfing, where it's like you can't necessarily control the waves, but you can kind of control your board and you're standing on it. And I guess that's why like I work very sketchy and quick like this, and why I've, with my own concept work, I've tried to develop a process that's more about efficiency and not speed for speed's sake, but just like, so I'm not precious about every detail. I'm just blah. Okay, what's working? That's working. Next image, blah. What's working? This is working. Next image, blah. Until I have like, enough of that imagery to build something more finished off of. Like one of my favorite painters is John Singer Sargent, and we all love Sargent. Like you see his beautiful portraits and you're like, oh my God, it's so detailed and perfect. But what you're not seeing is that he spent like hundreds of sketches to get to that point, and studies and value sketches, and like to make that hand, the reflection on the hand, one brush stroke.
How did you and the team arrive at a final art style, or is it still evolving? Was there a cutoff point? How does that work for your team?
You need to have a clear, distinct vision for your art team to follow. If you have a lot of ambiguity or contradiction, that's really not good. Like the last thing I want is any artist to feel apprehension. I don't want anyone to feel like, what am I doing? And apprehensive about the style. So there was certainly a point very early on, while I was working on these works here, is I kind of followed this order, which is like, what are our overall goals for the art? Like we know we want to ship on multiple platforms. We know we want to appeal to a wide audience, right? We know we want a style that supports monetization for free to play. Like all these types of goals I took to heart, because that's baked into the design of the team and what we want to do with the game. And those started with my goals. And then I worked with our inspirations, the core inspirations for the game design, for community sim games, for MMOs, my inspirations as an artist. And then with those, I came up with pillars, basically aesthetic pillars that kind of make up all of our decisions for the art. So it's like things like, living and breathing world, handcrafted, cozy design, these types of pillars that affect all of our decision making for the art.
When you say a cozy design, like that sounds like something subjective. If somebody on your team submits your piece, like how do you like, okay, this is cozy and this is not cozy? Like what would be distinctive elements that would shape that?
It's a good question, certainly. How do we take something subjective and turn it into like a visual? One thing I did early on with the team is I just had everybody like go on Pinterest and just make a mood board of imagery that you think is cozy, right? Because it is totally subjective. So we all did that. We all got it together. But one thing that stuck out to me and that was very personal to me was a sake bottle. Because when my wife and we used to live in the East Coast, when it was cold outside, we would drink hot sake to like it's just like a way to unwind and warm up a bit. And that something about the shape of it, that kind of half hourglass shape, is really appealing to me. So I wanted to see where I could take that and actually have it influence our visual design. So a lot of our style guide about like inflating and deflating shape, about making the bases thicker, sturdier, all kind of is inspired by the silhouette of a sake bottle, which is cozy, right?
How would you make something metal cozy?
So yeah, in our style guide, I wrote out a bit about like even hard materials can feel soft, like there's almost childproofing there. So things like metal, stone have heavy bevels, right? And that they're chunkier, they have heavy bevels, they have imperfections, wider in the base, right? And that's a way of kind of making things feel soft, even though it's a hard material.
I know you guys do hackathons quite often, right? It's like a part of your production pipeline. Can you tell me more?
It started off like it was during GDC week, so that the two founders in the company can go you know, go pitch the game and see if we can get more fundraising. So while they're out, like, hey, let's have fun, let's build something cool, right? Like, and it sort of just became this tradition that we've kept. And basically what it is, it's like everyone on the team, every developer is like pencils down on core work. Usually like the week before we like pitch ideas, and everyone can stand up their own team. They can pitch idea to the rest of the team and see if anybody's interested. There's like sign up sheets, and and it's an opportunity for artists to, like, say you're a concept artist and you want to learn more about animation, or if you're a 3D artist, you want to learn more about concept art, right? But at the end, we have a showcase where people are showing their little their prototypes that they've made, and it's so exciting. It's almost like a almost like a E3 presentation where it's just you're just excited to see what's next, right? Because the stuff they come up with is amazing, and I'd say like half or more actually are in the game right now.
What does it make your project so special for your team?
I think what really attracts a lot of people, and I've interviewed hundreds of people now at the studio. The thing that always excites them about us in particular is that we are really trying to do something different in the space. No one's made a community sim MMO. That's first, right? The art style is very interesting to people. I think that's a big reason why we've been able to attract a lot of the art talent, is because they're intrigued by the style. And people generally are just kind of tired of working, not putting down other games that are like shooters and gritty and realistic, but it feels like a lot of the industry is kind of chasing this finite goal all the time. And no one's thinking about like, well, what about this type of game, which is also very exciting for players, right? It touches a lot of gamers. Like, why isn't there more attention over here, right? Why does everything have to be like tense and stressful and shooter and Twitch based? Why, like, sometimes even playing a mobile game or like a clicker, just watching the numbers go up is kind of satisfying.
Excellent work, ladies and germs.
Was the game developed exactly as it was like envisioned from the beginning, or were there any pivotal moment in the process, and what caused those?
Oh man, there's several instances of this. It's funny because like when I worked at other studios, I as like an IC, as a concept artist, I go, oh man, if I had the opportunity to make a studio or whatever, build an art team, I would do it this way. And then when you get that opportunity, you've realized very quickly it's not that simple, right? You have to make compromises constantly for technical limitations, for the platform you're on, constantly. And I think, a good developer, a good director, a good leader can, not see them as disadvantages, but see them as advantages in disguise, I guess, way to see it. If we're limited on technical specs, then that's a new challenge to how do we make the game look as good as we want it to be within this constraint, right? So yeah, there's been a lot of areas like that. Certainly, like looking back at the old art, it was a very different feeling, right? I mean, not like we didn't change the feeling a whole lot, but it's just a very different like scope, I guess, than what we could do reasonably. Because as much as we're like 200 now and 50 artists, I'd say most of our development we were like 20 or 30 people, right? It was only recently that we've been like doubling the size of the studio, so a lot of that groundwork was done with a very different scale in mind. We always knew what we were making, and we always understood the vision of the game. That hasn't changed like in the years that I've been there. Like nothing's changed there. But what's changed is when you're making a studio that's about VC funding, like the funding can change the scope and scale of the game. Initially, we were like, we're going to ship in 2021 and have 50 total developers, right? That's what we were scoping at first. But we were very successful in the funding round, so scale increases, right? So when you have a certain scope in mind and then suddenly it gets bigger, there's a little bit of adjusting that has to happen.
You have had quite a big presence on ArtStation, on YouTube, on Instagram. It seems like lately, with the game approaching beta, it hasn't been your priority. Tell me a little bit more about like the tips and tricks around like why did you decide to do it? B, what was the journey doing that? Like what made you successful growing your audience? And I guess it also helped you with hiring as well later on.
Yeah, in some ways it has. I started teaching when was that? 2011 or 2012 at an art college called Maryland Institute College of Art. And that was my first time teaching. And I just felt like way out of my depth, But over the time teaching there, I really grew to like it quite a bit. And I never really felt like I was good enough to be able to teach, if that makes sense. But I quickly realized, and I tell this to people that I mentor too, is like, no matter where you are on that ladder, on that journey, there's always something you can do to bring somebody else up who's maybe at an earlier stage. So to just cut that out of your head, right? There's always something you can do to help others. So I really grew to really appreciate teaching, and but I started to realize like I'm not teaching necessarily to make money, if that makes sense. I just like helping other people. So I want to try to find ways to open that platform up to a wider audience. So that's why I started doing more YouTube.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Fensky, and I'm here with the video process of a recent fan painting I did called Link in the Forest Temple.
I started streaming on Twitch and YouTube, and just honestly, just genuinely just wanting to paint and challenge myself, because in some ways whenever I would go and do demos, whenever I get invited to do demos somewhere, I would always freeze up, and it was always like I never felt comfortable in my own skin. So I wanted to put myself out there to get myself to kind of get past some of these insecurities. So it was a little bit cathartic there, and trying to grow and be able to talk and paint at the same time, and then also help people, right, that come in to the channel asking questions or wanting feedback. So a lot of my focus was on that. So I did it for like 2.5 years pretty consistently, and was lucky to grow an audience, and they were fantastic, and I hope to do it again when things settle down.
I do believe they miss you. Well, they're gonna see a little glimpse of what you've been up to for the last 2 years, or actually, like, what, 5 years?
Well, yeah, this was 5 years, but I had to stop streaming like 2019 probably.
What do you feel were the biggest outcomes for you while putting your work public? And it's a very vulnerable thing. Like, you're streaming, you can probably like make mistakes while doing it. And, I'm a perfectionist myself, and I've seen your work. I'm sure that is there as well. Like, how did you deal with that? And like, what did you get out from the entire experience?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like I just never felt comfortable failing in front of others, I think was the issue. Um, and I wanted to fail enough in front of other people where I stopped worrying about it. I guess. I watch a lot of artists. I watch a lot of streams, like art streams, and I watch a lot of videos and tutorials. And honestly, nobody really talks about that. That kind of insecurity or some of the more psychological impediments to pursuing this as a craft or as a job or just bettering your skills. Like no one really talks about that much, and I wanted to be as open as possible and openly talk about it, because I think some people sometimes wrongfully just label like their favorite artists as just being like totally perfect and not feeling doubts and not having any insecurities, and that's really not true. I want to dispel that, right? So like by putting myself out there and being vulnerable and being willing to fail and then laugh about it, I think is really encouraging to young artists who feel the same way but just feel like everybody else is perfect and they're not. So that was also really it was a very important aspect for me to get across during those streams.
I feel like I'm still a student of that theory that you don't have to be perfect and it's okay to fail. And like, there's days where I'm like, it's okay, we're going to figure it out. And then I'm like, the world is falling apart. There's no way for me to, to overcome this. And then 2 hours later, I'm like, actually the world didn't end. It was okay. We totally figured it out.
Welcome to the real world, where most of the time, things don't go your way.
If you had a possibility to go back to, I don't know, a younger version of yourself that was just starting on this project, what were the tips that you would give to yourself?
Practically, for game development, one thing I would tell myself is hire more technical artists. Because, vision and aesthetics and amazing looking assets are just one part of it. My whole focus as an artist, as a concept artist, was, working games was always pretty narrow. It was like purely on aesthetics, purely on painting, purely on design, which are really great for a concept artist. But when you, like I said, it's one thing to prototype, it's another thing to make a game. And that's one area where I needed to learn as much as possible about tech, about performance, all these things that are really important that make these rich experiences playable for players. I think that's an area that I would certainly give myself that advice early on. As an artist, man, I think I would tell myself, my younger self, is that something that I learned through streaming is that it is okay to fail. It's okay for it to be close enough. Like, fail fast, learn fast. Don't try to make everything perfect, right? Like, it's more about expressing your idea at the end of the day. Like, you may think that this particular element of your craft is most important thing, but then you're kind of missing out on all the other aspects that are also really important. So I think I would tell myself that early on I tended to be very like narrow focused there.
And as a manager, what would you do differently?
So something that I learned over time, it's not like I didn't acknowledge this before, but I think the most important aspect of any team, any creative team, are the people. The people are the most important resource. They make or break whatever you're trying to create. Like, so I think it's important to maintain, really solid relationships there. And to always remember to encourage them, and even in ways that you don't expect, right? I think that kind of encouragement is really important.
Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing with me today about the project and your journey of building it and switching from, more fantasy and realistic world to very inspiring, stylized, and magical experience. And thank you so much for building something for players like me. I can't wait to play. And yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been really great chatting with you, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you for the invite.
It's an honor of mine. Thank you.